I know there was this, picture painted that I gathered up my family in the middle of the night, rented a truck, and snuck away to Alabama. This was the whole process.
It felt everything that the show was great for was being changed. And we all were sort of looking at each other, rolling our eyes, going, what the hell is happening?
It was heartbreaking because you would get emotionally involved in it. And when I had to tell Artie that we were, going to part company, it was on a Thursday, I think it was, and he went home and and he stabbed himself like 7 times.
This was a thing where I had to check and make sure that I could even do this, that things could be worked out, with serious, what are the deal with taxes? Like, there's all this shit that has to happen before you can just up and leave for Alabama. So management knew. Management was fine with it. In fact, they were like, listen, you're a huge part, an important part to us, and we will make this work one way or another. And so I felt supported. I felt, cool, these guys understand the situation and they have my back. And then, when I got out here, it wasn't necessarily their fault, man. I think just when I got out here, I just kind of realized mentally that I wasn't fitting into this anymore. I wasn't, it's the weirdest thing because you got to understand this was my dream thing. I don't even want to call it a job, but this was my dream since I heard the show, was to be a part of it on some level. But I always said to myself, if this ever feels like a job, then it's over. And it kind of started feeling that way to me, where it wasn't fun. And I know a lot of people out there don't have fun at their job, and I get that. I did plumbing, I did construction, I dealt blackjack, roulette, and I pushed fat people in wheelchairs. So when it comes to having jobs that are not fun, I got it. But for me mentally, I just felt like the clock was ticking. I'm missing out on these opportunities. I'm seeing friends of mine that are growing across the board just from starting simple things like a podcast, And so for me, it got to the point where I'm like, I'm not happy. And that starts bleeding into my family life. And that's unfair to them. They didn't do anything but support me this whole time. So it's time to make a change. And when they offered me that, I wasn't necessarily hurt because, financially my cost of living now has plummeted. So, to say, hey, we're going to cut your salary in half if I was still living in New York, I'd be like, go fuck yourself. But where I'm living now, that's still doable. Losing the benefits, that I wasn't happy about and didn't really understand. But at the same time, there's a huge part of me. It's 15 years of my life. Walking away was not going to be easy. So I agreed to it at first. But then, when the agreement kind of changed a little bit, that's when I was like, okay, you know what? It's just time for me to take control of this and do it my way and bet on me. And if I fail, I fail. But I don't feel like I will.
We all were shocked. First thing I did is I turned around and looked at Doug, and Doug sort of seemed dumbfounded too. So we had heard, now I had been through probably 5 or 6 contract negotiations, whether it be radio or TV along the way. So I was just assumed that, this is just going to be another one of those negotiations. But when he said it was going away, I still didn't believe it. I sort of was like, he's really negotiating, But then as we heard more, and then Howard took us, had a little brief meeting with us after the show, that it seemed real. And I was like, oh, this doesn't sound good. But I still hoped that someone would come in. I thought, he's doing the radio show. Why wouldn't he want the free money to do the television show? We didn't ask for anything of him. He literally just had to do the show, and we would handle the television part. So I really thought it would come back, and it didn't. And I've heard various reasons for that, but Who knows?
The only one that they said, hey, we're going to make you part-time now because you moved out.
I don't know. I don't know. Nobody's come to me from there and said, they tried the same thing with me. I don't think so. But again, I don't know.
What was the difference when it went from being in the studios in March and then now working from home? Just tell me the minutia. I'm always curious how it really came together quickly. Howard's now in his basement, and Robin's in her wherever she was, looked like her kitchen. But the show obviously sounds the same, but they put out clips and you get to see now Howard's basement and Beth coming in. But how did it change the way the show was done, and how did it just talk about that time where everybody kind of just regrouped, because you guys all do work in an office, and now, this is a big radio show. And
it's a credit to that team over there, man. They're so efficient, and there's nothing they can't adapt to. I mean, it's a fucking worldwide pandemic, and they find a way to send us equipment and lights and mics and sit there on the weekends and fine tune the audio with people and walk people through installing shit. And, it's a huge, huge thing while you're still trying to keep your family safe. So that team over there, all the people responsible for that, all the tech people behind the scenes, the grunts, they're amazing. As far as for me, as an on-air talent, as they like to say, it was a big change. It was a big change because I'd finally gotten into a flow there where I could go to Gary and be like, hey, I got something on high pitch. And he'd go in. It wasn't even like, what is it? And there was stages there for years where it was like, it was like TSA, but not TSA in the States, TSA in Israel, like where they're hardcore. And they ask you some, are you circumcised? Weird shit to see, how you react. So Gary at first was like, okay, what's the information? Okay, when did you hear that? When did you? Now I'm in a point where I'm like, yeah, I got this. He's like, go, boom. So I'm in, and so for performance wise, everything changed, and there was really no way to find that groove. It wasn't as organic as it was, and I, as a fan, the organic moments are the most energetic moments. It's when the entire staff and audience is like, holy shit, I can't believe this is happening right now.
Yeah, I agree. It is hard to do anything on Zoom because you have to wait, and I can't talk when that person's talking, so I get it.
Yeah, but I mean, like, take, for example, it was like a month or two ago, that dude Bill from Arizona called in, right? And he couldn't have a conversation with Howard. He kept saying, hello, this is Bill from Arizona. And then a couple of us called in, Phil from Arizona, Bill from Barcelona. And it's hilarious. And people are tweeting about it for days. They're talking Facebook, whatever. And that's organic, right? That happens on the spot. And the energy for something like that, you can't duplicate that.
So again, I'll keep saying this. I really enjoyed your podcast. In your first one, you really kind of run through a lot of the things I was going to ask you about, so you can hear the whole story of how you started calling in. But I'm just curious, how do you even get through? Because I remember as a fan back in the day, I was like, I'm going to try calling. And, it would be busy. I didn't even understand how someone would even get through. So this is early 2000s. You start calling in from Las Vegas, and then it turns into, I've got an idea every day. Tell me a little bit about just the beginnings of Shuli. You were a comedian, you're working out in Las Vegas, and you're thinking, I want to be part of this show. How do I do it?
Yeah, I mean, I had lived in LA for 10 years. That's where I discovered Howard in the early 90s when he came on in LA. And then by the time I got to Vegas, I mean, I had listened to so much of the show. I recorded best ofs on cassettes. Whenever I would go on drives with my family, I'd force them to listen to it. So I was a huge, huge fan. And, as far as calling in, like, as dumb as it sounds and as wild as it sounds, it was literally like a movie, like it was scripted. Like, I had this idea because he announces one night, I'm coming to Vegas to do a set of shows from the Hard Rock, and we're going to make bets at the blackjack table. And I'm like, shit, I'm going to call in. I had heard this like stock joke I worked in this liquor souvenir store in downtown Vegas. like right by where the county jail is and where all the pawn shops are and the Fremont Street Experience. So I used to meet a lot of interesting people. And this one guy told me this stock joke that I just thought was so funny. It's a street joke. So I said, you know what? I'm going to call in. I'm going to proposition how I'm going to say, I'm going to tell you this joke. And if you laugh, I want to make a bet with you guys at the table. And I pick up the phone. I dial the 800 number and sure enough, picks up first time, Benji screening the calls. And he's like, what do you want to talk to Howard about? And I tell him, and he puts me on hold. And 2 minutes later, I'm on the air with Howard doing the joke. He laughed. And next thing you know, he's like, hold on for Gary. And from 10, 11 years of listening, my first call, I got booked to make a bet with them at the blackjack table.
Remember that. Yeah. Do you remember, you know what June 6, 2003 is? Does that date ring a bell for you?
I was not on the grassy knoll, if that's what you're asking. Well, what is that?
It was your first day sitting in on the show, according to marksfriggin.com. And I'm curious about just sitting in on the show. So you're a caller. You're starting to make your way through, but now you're asked to sit in. What is that day like when they call? Just give me a little bit about that. I'm sure it's Gary, but tell me who calls. Where are you, and like what's that feeling like when they're like, dude, you're gonna be not just calling in, not just being in for the news. You're on. I mean, you started the day that morning on the show, according to Mark Friggin, and I sort of remember it.
Yeah, it was wild, man. It was. To think that they would even give me this opportunity just shows how poor the booking was back then, really, is what it shows. There's no reason I wasn't ready. I didn't know shit about radio. I wasn't really funny then. You know what I mean? Like, I was so new to everything. But again, here's the thing, right? Like, I was calling in with material. I was calling in with games, with questions, on my own. Nobody asked me to do it. There was no payment for it. I used to have comics in Vegas that would be like, what the fuck are you doing? You're staying up till 6 a.m, calling some fucking show. The guy doesn't pay you. And I'm just like, how do you not get this? To me, it was a no-brainer. I'm like, because Stuttering John would sit here and go, oh, he loves your calls. Or Benji would say, oh, he really likes your stuff. That's all I need to hear. That's it. I'm doing, that's my job now. And that's literally how I treated it. So when they brought me in, I mean, I'm almost positive, because I don't remember a lot about it. I'm almost positive it was terrible. I remember I sat in for the news once at K-Rock, and Gary, to my face after the segment, I go, I'm just sitting there in my head going, I wonder how that went. And he goes, no, you did a great job. He goes, why don't you go hang out in the Yucko the Clown room, which was his way of saying the bomb room. And I'm like, I remember at one point Howard saying, and I don't know if it was this appearance, but I remember at one point saying, I like when you call in because I can hang up on you. He's like, can you go call in from the green room? So I probably was just shot out of a cannon, blah, 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 all over the place. I know it didn't go well.
We've seen this big summit meeting on YouTube. We've heard about it. Howard wants A-list guest, and he's got this PowerPoint that he's put up in his crazy office. What was it like just for you as there was these changes? We all have heard of MARCI coming through. I don't know if she dealt with you guys as much, but what was it like for you?
Honestly, it felt like the beginning of the end. It felt odd. It felt everything that the show was great for was being changed. And we all were sort of looking at each other, rolling our eyes, going, what the hell is happening?
Doug, was that across the board? News department feels it. The TV department feels it. The wrap-up show.
Listen, I won't name names, but everyone was just in disbelief and shaking their head after that summit. And when certain people came on board, it was just, what the
Look,
it was bizarre. It was
the
just
part about the summit that I liked was that Howard was pushing for more guests. And there was a real attitude towards guests before that. Gary would never look for guests, and Howard would not want him to do that. And he used to always shock me. I'm like, hey, this guy's in town. Why aren't we getting them on? but Howard just had this different take. If they want to come on, they know where to find us. And so I enjoyed that part of that summit where Howard was saying, hey, we're going to go out and get the guests for once and have a actual booker for the show. But it was the rest of the stuff that was odd.
Yeah, what were those last days like as you're watching Howard say, yeah, I have an idea. We're going to get rid of Howard TV, but I have an idea. What was it like? Because it happened on the air. He didn't tell anybody, as usual.
Yeah, I mean, we all were shocked. First thing I did is I turned around and looked at Doug, and Doug sort of seemed dumbfounded too. I mean, so we had heard, I had been through probably 5 or 6 contract negotiations, whether it be radio or TV along the way. So I was just assumed that, this is just going to be another one of those negotiations. But when he said it was going away, I still didn't believe it. I sort of was like, he's really negotiating, But then as we heard more, and then Howard took us, had a little brief meeting with us after the show, that it seemed real. And I was like, this doesn't sound good. But I still hoped that someone would come in. I thought, he's doing the radio show. Why wouldn't he want the free money to do the television show? We didn't ask for anything of him. He literally just had to do the show, and we would handle the television part. So I really thought it would come back, and it didn't. And I've heard various reasons for that, but who knows?
So I'll let either of you answer this because it's probably difficult, but it now is being done the exact same way you guys did it. You set the template, and Sirius puts out clips, and it's basically done through Sirius. Why? I mean, my question would honestly be, why didn't they just ask you guys back? Or did you think there was something there that they didn't want this group back? They want to do their own?
No, that's a good question. I mean, it did take 3+ years for them to get back and do it. I think there was just like one intern or someone just pressing buttons, and it was like that for a while. The only way I saw it is, and I don't know how else to see it, is the clips on Twitter. And I would call Scott and be like, I can't even watch more than 10 seconds of this. It's just, they're destroying it. It's definitely gotten a lot better since with the clips I've seen. They've definitely put some meat into it and good production quality. But at the beginning, I mean, it took years before they had, I think what Scott was saying, we just thought there would be, just like we went from E to In Demand, there'd be a seamless transition, and that transition didn't happen. And it took years for anyone to come and pick it up. And that's, I don't know if you could say no one picked it up and Sirius took it over, or I don't know what happened there, but that's what happened.
They had our phone numbers. They knew how to get in touch with us. I'm curious to this day why they didn't, whether it be, I've thought of everything. Was I too political? What did Howard, was he not into the arguing anymore? Did MARCI think we were bad for the culture there? So did we get paid too much? I don't know. It could have been any reason, but they never called. They called for one thing, to help. I'll tell you a story. After we had just left, Gary asked Doug and I to help with the birthday show that was coming up. Howard's big, 60th birthday party, I think. So we had been through those. Doug always ran the whole, practically the guts of the behind the scenes of the show. So he and I went in, took a meeting in the city, and I told him, here's where you're going to want Howard, here's where you're going to want the stage, blah, blah, blah. I told him a bunch of stuff. Doug then went, put all the finances together and said, all right, this is what it's going to take. Then I hear from a camera guy who I know, who talked to my wife and said, Scott asked me to do the birthday show, but I've just been hired by another director. I was like, what? So we call up Gary, and Gary was like, oh, how'd you find out? Like, not, sorry, I should have told you guys. I mean, we had taken these meetings and we budgeted the whole thing and we had worked on it. And it just felt like we're already down because we're looking for work now. And then he just kicked us in the nuts,
Yeah, that's a story that I moved on. I didn't really look back, but that was the hardest pill to swallow. That was just classless and disgusting. Let's not sugarcoat it. That was pathetic and really just unforgivable. And why it was done, I don't know, but I know that didn't just sting. That hurt, and it hurt Scott. It hurt everyone on the TV team. People were just in disbelief. And then to make it even worse, not one person from the TV crew was even invited to the actual party after that classless act. And then on top of that, there were empty seats that they were handing out free tickets on the street to strangers the night of the event. So
yeah, we were told there were no seats left.
That what?
We were told there were no seats left. That's why we couldn't go.
Yeah, and I was told directly from someone why we weren't invited, and it was someone's decision who came on board late and late in the game. I don't know what the vendetta was, or what kind of mindset, or what kind of insanity was going on, where you rationalize and justify not inviting a loyal set of troopers after you just took the gig away from them without even telling. Listen, this is the stuff that people know about. I'm not shedding light. I'm maybe shedding a little more light on it, but these stories are out. You've heard these. That's the truth. Okay. That owed everyone an apology, but of course not, because that's not the way it works over there.
How do you? Baba Booey's been there forever. He's very loyal to Howard. Do you just chalk it up to that, or do you go, come on, be a human being?
I don't think Gary had anything to do with it.
I'm just saying anything that happens with Gary and just he's been shit on for so many years, but has a huge house, has beautiful stools in his basement. Is that just what it kind of is? Is that he's just a loyal soldier and he's going to retire happy and wealthy?
He's not going to ruffle any feathers. He's got a great gig. Listen, he's ridden the wave for this long, and he's probably close to retirement age. So I get after the next contract, he's probably done.
I don't think Gary was going to go to bat for me anytime soon after the whole sleeping video that Doug really was responsible for. But I took the heat.
I just watched that again I do research here, and the research is watching old clips on YouTube, and that is hilarious. Just some of the stuff that goes on. Now, do you guys watch YouTube and look at some of these old things, or is it, I did it, I don't care, I'm not that big a fan, I'm pissed off, or whatever?
A lot of people, I'll be on the golf course, and a lot of people ask me Stern stories, and I always come up with the same 4 or 5 stories, and I'm like, so every once in a while, I'll look for something and watch something, and it reminds me. But no, I don't really do a lot of Howard Stern YouTube watching. Because, ultimately I feel like that's partly why the show went away. YouTube killed our job.
YouTube was a big problem. We couldn't keep up with the piracy. And for every show we would get taken down by the legal team, 10 of them would go up, to the point where we'd see a direct correlation with subscriptions starting to go down as the content on YouTube went up. And it was in the infancy of piracy, basically, with people putting so much stuff up on YouTube and stealing. They just couldn't control it.
I could see that, but it's like Napster. I love it. It gives me an outlet here. People steal this show.
So tell me, what did you watch? What did you watch that you enjoyed?
Just of this, I saw you and Jason, your good Jason stuff, of course. There's the Al Franken arguments there, of course. The Gary saga. There's like 8 hours of that with you, the camera. Because you're right. Then it went into the wrap-up show, and then what he says on the wrap-up show then becomes fodder the next day on the show. So it's funny. Tell me, so these times where Artie, I love Artie, I miss Artie, I ask everybody about Artie, but Scott, tell me about these times when you're watching him fall asleep, or you're watching him fight Teddy or Sal, and did you have sense that there was issues with him, or did you feel weird about showing this, or was it, hey, it's a big party, Artie's laughing at it, it's fun?
I literally had no idea he was doing drugs until after he would say it each time. Then I'd be like, oh, but then the next time I would give him the benefit of the doubt. And again, he must just be tired because he was up all night long. I don't know. But there became a time when the eyes start rolling into the back of his head sort of stuff. And the eyes, the lids are like half open. And, I had a camera on him. I felt like I had to do my job and capture it, but I felt guilty for it. And the extent that it was funny and he played along, like putting the bed out there so he could take a nap during the interview. Who was being interviewed when he's sleeping there? She's talking about her, like,
was it Avril Lavigne or?
She's talking about an award she won or something, and here's Artie just snoring on the bed. It was so funny. But so the extent we can make fun of it, it was great. But ultimately, it was sad. And Artie was a good friend and generally the funniest person that worked in that whole 20 years of the show. And I just hope he figures it out, You
don't keep in touch with him, right?
He changes his phone number all the time.
Yeah.
So I'll call him once a year maybe when I find a new phone number, and we'll talk for a little while, and then he disappears again. So,
Doug, I was listening again, doing research, but I forgot about this. You met O.J. Simpson on the golf course and asked him to come on the show. I didn't prep you for this story, but again, as I'm doing research, and I'm like, I remember him telling that story. Do you want to relay that here, or do you remember?
I don't think I met OJ on the golf course.
Was it not? Okay, evidently.
No, that's not Doug. That was the guy in L.A. The guy
Gary Garver.
Who was the guy in Vegas who
Gary Garver
had a fight with?
Oh, Gary Garver?
Yeah, that was Gary Garver.
Yeah, your research sucks, Brad.
Well, I will send you the link of you telling the story, Doug, that I talked to OJ.
I met him at a bar in Tampa when I was down with some friends randomly, and the guy I was with ended up knowing him, and OJ came over and gave him a big hug. It was the most awkward thing ever. It was bizarre. And then he sits down with us, and next thing you know, I'm sitting in a club or a bar or whatever it was with OJ Simpson. It was really bizarre.
The juice. You see OJ. I think that's that whole time, the early 90s. I was going to ask, Scott, do you have a favorite? I always ask the Jackie era or the Artie era. Do you have, or then the third era, whatever the MARCI era, whatever we call it. But
they are two different eras. Jackie was more like there's a party in the studio, and Artie was more like, an SNL funny classic Dan Aykroyd bit. It was just two totally different experiences. I would probably vote for the Artie era, but Jackie was damn close second. When Billy West was there and just the howling and the laughing and here's a weird dynamic. Jackie he would write jokes and then put them into a bin that we had a camera up, and then Howard would read it, right? So whenever Howard said something anti-Fred, the first thing Fred would do is he would look over and look in the bin and see if Jackie wrote it. And then he would attack Jackie. He wouldn't come back at Howard. He'd be like, well, Jackie's a drunk.